All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Gumtree of Liberty live podcast, episode 24. I'm joined today by our editor, Ed, to talk about the military-industrial complex. How are you going, mate?
I'm doing good. Just
Well,
tired and
before we jump,
stressed.
aren't we all? Before we jump into that, I might get you to quickly just introduce who you are and how you became a libertarian in America.
Well, I'm Ed. I have to go by Special Ed. Well, it all started in 2019 when I got fed up with the Republican Party not doing anything. They would hold office and then just sit there collecting a paycheck and not doing shit. And it honestly got under my skin. And at that point, I just said, you know what? Let me look into other parties that exist out there. I'd known about the Libertarian Party, but I never actually experienced it. And when I first started experiencing it, it kind of turned me off with so much infighting and people arguing like who's a real libertarian and who's not a real libertarian. And it was like, I'm going to hold off for a bit. So it wasn't until like 2020 where I was like, oh, fuck this. I'm going to, I'm just going to give up and finally go to the party because I was absolutely sick of the Republicans not doing anything and just using people, just getting votes, collecting a paycheck, and that be it. And also 2020 is when I realized that no form of government would ever actually work because eventually it's all going to fall into some sort of crisis and cease to exist. Um, but I didn't officially become a card carrying libertarian until 2021. Ironically, it was the same day I got arrested for the first time. Sorry, second time.
Do you want to go into that and a bit, if you don't mind, about your experience with the government through that?
Well, so to give a long story short, what happened? I had gotten drunk and I tried to die by cop. And in Pennsylvania, there's something called the 302 system where, in that situation, they're supposed to commit you to a psych ward. They're not supposed to charge you with crimes and send you to prison or jail. And they did that instead. And I remember the sergeant coming and doing that while I was in the hospital and telling them to stop doing the 302 paperwork and just they were going to book me. And he also had threatened me as well when I was saying, I was clearly in a mental health crisis. And I remember him telling me to shut up, sit back, or something bad was going to happen to me, were his exact words. And then I spent 7 weeks in jail where I realized that not only was that one of the worst experiences I've had in my life, and I've almost died several times, um, prisons are just, they're all about money. You can tell because even the prisoners know this. Like most of them were just people who were just saw it as a small vacation. Um, when I first got there, I was put into the COVID isolation unit, which is in the same prisoners that the same jail because there was different buildings, the same jail where they hold rapists and murderers. Yeah, the COVID isolation unit was in the same jail they hold the rapists and murderers in. So it was a luck of the draw with the kind of roommate or cellmate you got. And me, I got another one who was a special mental health case, but this guy was much worse. He legit thought that he was God. He threatened me on multiple occasions. And there were times where I could not sleep at night because he would be performing some sort of ritual, as he called it, and talking to himself very loudly.
Yeah.
And then when I was transferred to the general population, I met, and this is actually funny. I met 5 different people named Ed. And my other 2 cellmates were both named Ed. Both were Edwards, like me. One was an Ed, 2 were Edwins, but I still count them as Ed, so it doesn't matter. But then I was released without bail because that's the other thing is my bail was set to 50,000. And I was not charged with any felonies. I was just charged with misdemeanors.
Yeah.
And No one was even hurt during the exchange. No one was pressing charges against me. It was just the judge decided that my bail was going to be super high for no reason. Then I also found that there's another guy who's there in my cell in the prison who's there for triple homicide, and his bail was only $5,000.
Do you know why that was so high for you and so low for him?
Well, I don't know, because I was hearing various stories from various people. Like, this one dude was only there for fraud. It wasn't even that bad of a case, and he was being held with 100,000 bail. And then there's other guys who, one dude was there for. Heard a story about one guy who was there for literally trying to murder his ex-girlfriend, and he was put on house arrest. It's the entire system is absolutely fucked. In fact, when I was there, 2 people were murdered in the parking lot. One was literally assassinated. I'm not kidding you. Who by professional assassins, like professional hitmen, a mother and son team, apparently. And then another kid was killed by a rival gang when he was released. And yeah, it was bad. Like, when COVID had actually happened, I was told that they were leaving the bodies in the cells for days on end and not taking them out until until they were essentially forced to take them out. And apparently also inmates are being stabbed for phone time, which was also a really big thing there. And it was like most of the guards don't do anything, because it's like one or two guards to a cell block with like 100 and some inmates in it. So if something does go down and you're perceived to be on the guard side of it, you're pretty much dead. So I didn't really have a choice but to be on the quote unquote inmate side of things in order to kind of protect my own life. But yeah,
So go ahead.
ahead.
How did you get out of that situation? And how did did they drop the charges against you?
Oh no, they're still ongoing. Right now I'm in this program for mental health cases that as long as I go to therapy and take my meds and everything, they'll drop the charges. But I didn't start seeing a therapist until 2 days ago, because everywhere was like a 6 to 8 month wait.
Yeah. Same thing over here.
It's like there's not enough people for it, and it really feels like a lot of people have left, which is making it undermanned. But I luckily got one, because the same place I had to do psychiatry, it's a university hospital. So I'm meeting with students opposed to actual working professionals. But at this point, I'll take what I can get.
Yeah, over here, because everything's, you can get all free through Medicare, the public health service. There's long waiting lines. Because apparently the pay is better for government than private. A lot of people go government, meaning there's less people for the private sector to have for psychiatrists and psychologists, and then you end up having really long waiting lines in the government, in the public healthcare system, because everyone's getting it because it's free. So yeah, we've got a similar problem over here with just a lack of specialists.
Yeah, I feel that. I can tell you, like, most people are doing it now. Like, they're not even paid well here. It doesn't matter if it's government or private, and they're paid terrible. It's like never a career I would get into.
Actually, I saw an Instagram ad a couple of days ago that was for advertising for therapy by counselors, people who can't get in to see psychiatrists. So the ad admitted that there's long waiting lines. So go see a counselor instead of seeing a qualified psychiatrist, because it's better than waiting for that long. And I can imagine that given how everything's so expensive in the US because of how Obama screwed up the healthcare system, it'd be something similar over there as well, with the wait and the lack of people.
Oh yeah, Yeah, if you're not paying it out of pocket, it's going to be an extra long wait. Like, I have state health insurance, so it's not too long, but I only have it because I'm autistic. That's it. But they couldn't find places at first because so many were full. And like I said, I kind of just lucked out on this one, but that is like a fight on its own because for some reason they thought I had a different health insurance, and it turns out I didn't, but they thought I did for some weird ass reason, so they canceled my first appointment.
Crazy. And was the university hospital, was it? With the
Yep.
med students, yeah.
Yeah, they canceled my first appointment, and then they told me, "Oh, yours is going to be on the 31st." Then they changed it literally the day before the 30th. I'm like, "Okay, we actually need you to come to the 30th." I'm like, "Buddy, I can't do that." They're like, "Okay, well, you don't have a choice." So I literally fell asleep during the time it was supposed to happen because I told them I wasn't going to be able to do it. And then they're like, "Okay, we're just going to go with the original scheduled plan of the 31st." And then I attended that one.
Yeah. Gotcha. So that was the appointment you had, what, 2 days ago?
Yep. It felt like the guy talking to me was reading from a textbook.
Well, to be fair, he is a student, so most
Yeah.
of his learning comes from textbook rather than experience. To be fair to them.
Yeah, I mean, I am his experience, and I hope he enjoys it because he's going away in May, getting replaced by another student.
Yeah, that'd be again sort of because you're going to have changing psychiatrists. You have to explain to every psychiatrist again the problems and go through the same process. I've done that. It's not fun.
Yeah, I've been in the system since I was like 3 or 4 years old. And I remember telling my psychiatrist, he was like, "So when was the first time you took meds?" I'm like, "They had me on meds since I was 4. And I stopped taking them in 2017 because I was just done with it. And then they started making me take them again. And yeah, I don't like medications personally because it just it doesn't make me feel right, you know?
Yeah. All right, and then going on to the military-industrial complex, do you mind explaining how that started, and we can talk from there? How did they
So
start in the first place, especially in the US, but in general?
so well, I'm going to use generalized here because it's more of a global thing than it is a US thing. Well, the US is the biggest part of it right now. It didn't start here. It actually started in Europe because back in the day, companies didn't have very specific military contracts. Like even shipbuilders that would build like man of wars or ships of the line didn't only build those, didn't focus on those. They just built them when they came up. I want to say it kind of started to change around the mid to late 19th century when you started to see things that were more militarized. Like warships were no longer something that could be also built at a steamliner or a cruise liner yard. They had to have special naval yards built up for them to
Yeah, ironclads and dreadnoughts and the like, which is
yeah.
steel.
Yeah, and then we also had very specific military weapons because back in the day, you didn't really have that. Of course, it changes with time. Like the medieval era, yeah, you had specific types of weaponry used then that could only be made by blacksmiths. But even then, it wasn't more, oh, we're only doing this to get money so we can profit off of war. It was more, we're doing this so we can profit off our Lord. It was really more so the late 19th century is when you start seeing companies start to slowly go to, oh, this war thing we can make a lot of money from. Governments are willing to shell out money that they don't have for us. And then World War One happened. And then you saw companies that were specifically focused on making munitions, weapons, ships, planes. And that's when they started to realize, hey, this war thing is probably the best thing that's ever happened to us. And then you also had companies like think it was Dole, maybe not Dole, but fruit companies. You know anything about Smedley Butler? Now I've never read his book, but I know what he's talking about. War is a racket because companies will use the military to strong arm small nations. It's like the whole thing with South America in the 20s and 30s with the U.S. literally going down there and invading it. It was World War II is when the military-industrial complex kind of like officially was solidified. They realized that we make more money making war equipment than we do civilian equipment. Let's stick to that. And you start to see a shift in companies like Boeing, for example, started to shift towards more military contracts than civilian contracts. Where's another good example here? Trying to think of this. Armalite. There's a company for you. The company that made the M16 before Colt took it over, or bought them out and took it over. They were mainly making military weaponry. Their whole thing was to make, like, they made the AR-10, different models of the M16 that were all specifically made for the military.
Yeah.
So the Cold War era is where you see it get big as it is now, and then it just never went down. So that's kind of how we got to the point we're at now.
Well, I guess it's always been a very exclusive industry. I have read a bit on the 30 Years' War in the 1600s, and it was basically a guild system that you had to be in the guild to be able to produce those weapons as a blacksmith or a gunsmith or whatever. So I guess it's always been a protected industry. There's always been just a handful of people producing the weapons, and then obviously it's developed from there, I guess. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it would have been big in the Lend-Lease era when the US wasn't in the war, but was funding the UK.
Mm-hmm. Especially, like, you know, with the Liberty ships, like, they were turning them out like fucking glue. That's why, like, when they found the Titanic, they thought they were first looking at a Liberty ship because there were so many that were sunk in the Atlantic. Which is not a topic I usually talk about because shipwrecks are my greatest fear, but it's something I bring up a lot, like when talking about this kind of topic, is when you have so much of something, you're going to mistake it for something else. But yeah, that's especially with like the whole, like they made car companies or car manufacturer. God, this is a tongue twister. I've been doing this all today. I couldn't even say chocolate chip pancakes at breakfast. Car manufacturers were building tanks and planes because they were the only companies that had the facilities to do so at the time. And then they started to turn that stuff out during World War II. And that's why I say, like, World War II is when it was solidified. When companies realized they could make billions just selling military equipment to the U.S. government. It's like, you know, you ever wonder why there's so much U.S. equipment floating around the world? It's because companies realize they can make so much money just turning it out. Like, I don't know if it's the Pentagon or DOD. One of the websites has actual military contracts that the average Joe can pick up. Like, if you have access to a guy who knows how to build guns, or a guy that may have some ammo he's not supposed to have, you could sell that to the government through a military contract.
If I remember correctly, I think it was Ford who, during World War II, built tanks and trucks for both sides.
Trucks. I don't think they built tanks for the Germans, but
Trucks,
that's because Hitler was a good. Hitler and Ford really liked each other. Hell, I'm pretty sure Ford is even mentioned in Mein Kampf. It's one thing that when Americans were finding like these German trucks and they were looking there and they were saying these are Ford, they were told to keep quiet about it. Like there's a lot of US companies that supplied stuff to the Nazis during World War II.
There seems to be a bit of a trend with US companies having ties with the Nazis through anti-Semitism. You got Disney, Ford. I wouldn't be surprised if General Motors was involved as well, knowing what they're like.
I mean, IBM literally provided the numbers for the Holocaust, provided the machines for the numbers. Like, if you see a company these days being quote unquote woke, chances are they're tied to the Nazis in some way, shape, or form because they don't want that getting out. Most of these companies, it's public knowledge what they fucking did, but most people just don't want to believe it. Like I just don't. How do I put this? I just don't care. Like I'm 30% Jewish myself, and they fled from Germany in the 30s. After it wasn't after I can't fucking pronounce this Kristallnacht. It wasn't after that. It was before that.
Night of Long Knives.
Yeah, it was. They fled in 35, I believe, because there's a marriage certificate between my great grandfather and great grandmother. Great grandmother is the Jewish side. And that was in 1936, and that was in the US. So it was, I think, in 35 is when they fled.
Well, if you're thinking 35, then that'd be Knights of Broken Glass then.
Yeah, because the family story is they fled Germany because they were afraid for their lives, and it's a good thing they did.
So where are we at today, right now, with I guess the MIC? You know, are they still that pervasive in society, or are they being reined in by the government? And how do the government and the MIC relate to one another? Who has the power?
Oh, I want to say corporations have the power, hands down.
Because I know there's been a big debate in libertarian circles as to whether the MIC runs the government, or whether the government runs the MIC.
To an extent, it's more about, in my opinion, it's more for them. It's more about making sure they're getting paid, making sure the conditions are just bearable, that they can get stuff out, but just low enough that they don't have to pay their people that much. I don't think it's definitely borderline cyberpunk dystopia, but not quite, in my opinion. Like it's more of those, the government has the power, but the corporations line their pockets to keep them from doing anything to them.
Yeah.
Like, how do you think some of these politicians who are supposed to be making what, 100,000, 200,000 a year, somehow have net worths of over $1 million?
Or Bernie Sanders with what, three houses?
Oh yeah, like my dad told me this. Campaign donations are one of the most unregulated things out there. If you ever wonder why impossible candidates are run, like people like, for example, people like Bernie Sanders, who are never going to get voted in, they're run because those campaign donations all go directly to him when his campaign falls flat. And usually big donors pay them off because he did something for them at some point. Because they're not going to ask questions about donations unless something very specific pops up. And that never happens. Because if they question one person, they're going to have to question everyone. And no one wants that to happen. Like, for example, if let's say I was the DA and I helped a mobster get off. Like I made sure that he got off and he wanted to pay me back somehow. And I said, you know what? I'm going to run for mayor. And he donated to my campaign. But I knew I wasn't going to make mayor. I would get all that money. And then what happens? He paid me back in that way. It's kind of how it goes.
If I'm speaking correctly, I could be wrong. It's been a while since I looked at the figures, but Australia spent, I think it's 45 billion Aussie dollars on tanks and trucks from the US. Now, and that's I think it's between now and 2025. I can get the figures actually. I read an article on it, but it's to upgrade the military, upgrade the tanks and trucks, especially the tanks. We currently use M1A1 Abrams, which we bought in 0807. The thing is that we haven't used tanks since Vietnam.
Yeah.
And the government decides, you know, we're going to upgrade from M1A1 to M1A2 and spend billions of dollars buying new tanks. We bought the old tanks 15 odd years ago and we haven't used them, but let's buy more.
Well, I've heard from people in the US military, at least, that they're shifting from doing coin or insurgency type missions to focusing on conventional warfare. So they know something's coming. They just don't want to say what. Like if you look at like most militaries in NATO right now, or at least NATO aligned ones, are getting prepared for some sort of conventional conflict.
Russia, China.
Yeah.
Supposedly.
Like the US Marines, for example, they got rid of their tanks because they're saying, you know what, we're probably going to go island hopping again and we're not going to need tanks. The US Army has decided that they think they're going to fight an actual conventional war against someone. And they started focusing more on that. And this is only from what I'm hearing from friends that I know are currently active. So, of course, I might be wrong. But when you look at saying one military is planning for conventional warfare is one thing. Like every military trains. But when you start looking at the broader picture, and I'm always a big picture guy, I always see the big picture. You start to wonder if something bigger is going on here, because almost every NATO, like I just said, almost every NATO aligned country is preparing for some sort of big fight.
Yeah, I know we definitely are, which is weird because you think, okay, why is Australia an island nation buying tanks? I got the figures up. We had 59 M1A1 tanks we bought in 2007. We've upgraded that to 75 M1A2 Abrams main battle tanks. Spent $3.5 billion to buy 127 tanks and other armored vehicles, including that 75 M1A2 Abrams figure. We're going to spend 30 to 32 billion on armored vehicles in the next few years, 18 to 27 billion on IFVs, infantry fighting vehicles, and we can't even use these for like 4 years. They're not going to be deployable until 2025, 2026.
They even have the people to man them.
I've got a cousin who's in the armored corps, and they do. But they have to obviously expand because that's more tanks than we have right now. So obviously they need to expand the armored corps a bit. But it's like, okay, Australia's an island nation, right? Why are we buying tanks? Yeah, you think you'd buy Air Force, and the biggest threat to us right now is China, not Russia. So why aren't you spending that money? If they really want to spend it on defense, spend it on the Air Force, spend it on the Navy. Because once China gets to the mainland, it's a lot harder to stop them because Australia is so big and sparsely populated with desert in the middle of the country. So you're better off trying to hold them off before they get to Australia than to let them land in the first place. But no, we're going to fight a war once they land. And because that's not very logical. So it does suggest that there's something else going on, something bigger, which is in line with the US. I think even Bernie Sanders supported one of the more recent F-line jets, F-36. I saw a Reason video on it a few years, Reason TV, did a YouTube video on it a couple of years ago, and they said even Bernie Sanders was supporting spending on fighter jets, and it really says something when you've got socialists supporting the MIC and building aircraft and building tanks to fight war. And I don't think you're on the money when you say that it's changing back to conventional warfare, because they've left Afghanistan already, so that's a big shift away from coin there, Nether, Ukraine, Russia. So I think we do have something else coming in terms of a new shift in warfare.
It's also not like we don't have coin operations going currently. Like, a lot of people tend to forget about the whole Africa conflict we have right now. Like, we're still fighting Muslim radicals over there. Like, everyone just conveniently forgets about the people we have there. Like they don't exist. And I'm amazed at people not even realizing that we are fighting a war over there. Because even like when that Iranian general was assassinated under Trump, one of the U.S. military bases that was hit was in Africa. It was actually a retaliatory strike, and supposedly they got just inside the base and then pushed back. And it was a special forces base, Army Special Forces. And those guys are meant to be embedded with the local military, training them and whatnot. So, like, when you see this big shift, especially when we're leaving other nations, like, we were going to be leaving Afghanistan one way or another. It was just, are we leaving the right way, or are we leaving how we actually left? Because Trump wanted to leave when the Taliban were under winter quarters, meaning they weren't going to pose any threat at all. And then the whole disastrous last-minute evacuation happened, and we all saw how that went down.
20 years of war and for nothing.
Yeah.
No, sorry, I'm wrong. Opium poppies.
You know, you're not the only person I've heard say that, and it's funny because it's one of the reasons we were in Nam was because of drugs. Like go ahead.
No, you go. I'll tune in after. Yeah.
I know. I had met someone, I was talking, and he was like, I went over there to stop them from getting drugs on the street here. And we ended up just taking it back anyway. So it was all for nothing.
I think it was either Magnus Panvidya or the guy who runs antiwar.com did a tweet last year and said that then they provided the graph and stuff. Opium poppy production in Afghanistan skyrocketed once the Taliban got kicked out, and the US took over running that. And I mean, it was basically a puppet Afghan government. But yeah, it's rarely for what they say it is. Like, just like the justification right now for Ukraine, probably isn't the most best. What's the current narrative on the war in Ukraine? It's Nazis. That Putin invaded to kill Nazis, which that's probably not.
I've never heard that. I don't even know why, because all I hear is Russia invaded Ukraine. But from the back channels that I've been talking to, is because they're trying to conquer Ukraine. That's at least what I've been hearing, because Putin's trying to get the old Soviet Union back together forcefully.
Yeah, people are saying, people on mainly the right, people who are more critical of both sides, have been saying, Putin's just doing this to remove Nazis and remove threats and like that, and so therefore the best thing to do is for Ukraine to surrender, and then remove those said Nazis, because you got like the Azov battalion, for example. There's been neo-Nazis on both sides. When you had the two offshoot rebel groups in the east, they had Russian neo-Nazis there from the early days of that civil war. But it's Putin has said, like, he said that his biggest regret in life is that the Soviet Union fell. He's a KGB colonel.
Oh yeah,
the guy wants to create an empire.
Yeah, like that's I was telling people when I worked at my old job this. Putin isn't invading Ukraine because of whatever they're telling you on TV. He's doing it because he wants to get the old Soviet Union back together. He wants to create another Soviet Union because he drank too much of the fucking Kool-Aid.
I mean,
My
look at where he's gone. Belarus is old Soviet territory. They're basically a puppet state. Lukashenko, or whatever his name is basically a puppet government of Putin. Kazakhstan, I would not be surprised if Russia had a role in that civil war, because it meant that the Russians then intervened in Kazakhstan with their military. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were involved in that. Because all the things they're doing are against old Soviet nations. They've always been fighting in the Caucasus to try and remove the rebels there. Chechnya, for example, and the other republics. They couldn't get back Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia, but the rest of the Caucasus nations that tried to get independence, they stopped all of them. So there's this general trend of Putin and of Russia trying to retake their old land.
Oh yeah, and then my other issue is like when people were talking about this war and like, oh, I support Ukraine, I support Ukraine. Well, where the fuck were you during the Azerbaijan war? Who did you support then? And you never get an answer because most people don't even know that happened last year.
Well, do you want to discuss that briefly? Because I'm aware of it. Probably a lot of people aren't aware of what happened then. So, do you want to go into that briefly?
So, Azerbaijan, as well as Armenia, had a couple months of war. I think Armenia lost, if I remember correctly. But basically, one side invaded the other, and it was a bloodbath on both sides. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. There were a shit ton of drones taking out tanks, and people were like, "Oh, tank warfare is useless." Except these are nations that don't have good air-to-air capabilities. Like I was following Twitter accounts that are from the official sources on both sides, and both sides were contradicting each other constantly. One was, oh, we shot down an Azerbaijan aircraft, and the other was, oh no, we actually shot down a Armenian aircraft. Like the entire war was just one big clusterfuck. And the big player was India, or not India. I'm sorry, was it India or Pakistan? I think it was Pakistan. Was supplying Azerbaijan. I'm probably pronouncing that name wrong, but I really don't care. With arms, equipment, and mercenaries. And as well as at one point they almost got involved themselves, but that's I think when it kind of ended because Armenia is a small country. But you don't hear anyone talk about it. You don't hear anyone say, "Oh, I supported Armenia" or blah blah blah. The only people I actually saw talking about it that weren't actually from there were people of Armenian descent. And the whole war was, I don't remember what it was about, but I know Armenia was attacked by Azerbaijan. And that's what kicked it off.
Was, from memory, it was over Nagorno-Karabakh.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that
which is a disputed territory that both claim that's in Azerbaijan land, recognized as being in Azerbaijan land. But Armenia claims that it's bad because you got on both sides, because then you've got that other pocket.
Yeah, it was captured during the last war, I believe.
So but then you've got also that pocket. So there's a part of Azerbaijan is separated from the rest of the country by Armenia. So there's part of Azerbaijan that's west on the end of the Iranian border, but it's separated from the rest of the country. So you've got Armenia claiming land that's in Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan with land that's not connected to the rest of itself. So both sides, have territorial claims there. People ignore that completely. People talk about Yemen and Sudan and Somalia. Like, this is
you want to know something else? You know something else that was also discovered? Well, sorry, it happened in 2020, not 2021. But you want to know something else that happened in 2021 that was also overshadowed? I want to go over this briefly. Another planet like Earth was found. And I'm surprised that so many outlets didn't report on it. In fact, the only outlet I can find that reported on it was NASA itself. And that just goes to show like how much happened in 2020. And for some reason, we only focus on the riots and the pandemic when so much other shit happened, like, full blown war between two. I want to say, two minor nations.
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate. They don't have powerful militaries. And most of what they do have is ex-Soviet.
Yeah, because I remember watching footage of it and like they're hitting them with old Soviet rocket trucks, Katyushas. And it was bad. But seeing like very few people talk about it was just, it's why like whenever I hear someone talk about Ukraine today, I just can't take them seriously. Like I only follow the war for the tactics and strategies used, and watching Russia is painful. It feels like I'm watching do you know about the Total War game series?
Yeah.
It feels like I'm watching two players from a Total War game, and one has no idea what the hell they're doing, and the other is just barely getting along by luck.
Well, it's funny that people, are now saying let's sanction Ukraine. 2014, from the war started. 2014, it's 2020, it's 2022 now. You've waited 8 years to complain and put it in your bios on Twitter or on Instagram to change your profile picture to a Ukrainian flag. It's been 8 years of conflict. So they had a civil war with those two Eastern Russian-backed separatist factions who are now fighting civil war against Ukraine. That's where that Malaysian Airlines craft was shot down over Ukraine by the rebels using Russian guns. Russia seized Crimea in 2014. It has been 8 years of fighting, and no one complained until now.
Yeah. I've been watching it I haven't really paid attention too much because it's mostly just been a stalemate. But like, I remember watching the story about this American banker that went over there to fight. Like everyone's talking about, oh, we're gonna go fight now. Well, where the fuck were you like 2-3 years ago when people were going over? Like this dude literally went over, and then when he came back to the U.S., he was arrested. You want to know what he was arrested for? This is like the funniest shit you'll probably ever hear, because he didn't pay $150 in taxes. But he like, I was watching it. He had no prior military experience. He went over to fight in Syria. Then he went over to fight in Ukraine. And I remember they were talking. He was like, "So what's the worst experience?" And he's like, "Being here, because they don't attack you head on. They just shoot a couple rockets at you and call it a day." And then you also have like people in the Ukrainian military who are talking about it. Like early on in the invasion, like reporters were asking, like, "Okay, what do you think about this?" And he's like, "Well, for the past, what is it, 5 years? Past 5 years, it's been hard, but now they just made it easy."
Also, the one thing I like about the war in Ukraine is that because Ukraine's ex-Soviet, they use MiG, not the American companies for their planes. That's the one good thing I like. That if it stays as it is right now, there's not going to be too much of a profit for the for Raytheon and Grumman, Northrop, and the others, because it's MiG planes, not Raytheon and the like, who are producing those planes, which I think is the silver lining. But at the same time, that proposal for Poland to send jets to Ukraine, and then the Americans would then backfill Poland by giving them US planes. Yeah, and it's now what, over $1 billion in aid.
Yeah, well, I mean,
From
we gave them fucking what was that rocket called?
Javelin.
Yeah, javelins. We gave them javelins, and look how much damage they're doing with javelins. Like
The
entire Soviet armor columns have been taken out from just javelins alone.
the UK gave 2,000 anti-tank pieces. I think it was anti-tank pieces to Ukraine to use against the Russians. And they also sent in 30 men and women from the Rangers Regiment, which is elite special forces that they've only just recently created. I think they created it last year or the year before last. And the idea behind that is basically, quote unquote, hearts and minds. They're there to train and supervise and advise foreign militaries. So they sent over 30 troops from the Rangers Regiment to help train the Ukrainian army against the Russians. Canada sent over special forces as well. The US sent over, it's the javelins. Yeah, Australia sent over coal apparently.
Oh, the U.S. had actual conventional forces over there training them, and
Yeah,
before the war even happened, and I just looked up that Ranger Regiment, and apparently it was formed in August of 2021. 4 battalions of 1,000 men.
and what else happened in that month? Afghanistan ended.
Yeah.
The exact same month. I wonder why there was that those lined up. Coincidence, right?
Yeah, well, it says that it was officially became a thing on the 1st of December 2021, but on the actual, because I'm looking at the wiki of it right now, because I didn't even know this was a thing, but it says that the actual like forming of it started in August of 2021.
Yeah. It started as the US was withdrawing from Afghanistan. But because there was that, because you had the withdrawal, there was no media coverage of the Ranger Regiment being formed. It happened, but no one covered it because I think it's too busy reporting on Afghanistan. But it's actually that's like they're preparing for something. They've got this to train other countries to fight against the Russians and Chinese and the like. And what people don't realize is you've got BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, at the same time, which is also, and they're preparing for a war as well. They're both sides are preparing for a conflict, and the people who profit the most from this are the MIC. You know, people say that war's bad for everyone. No, it's not. It's not bad for the companies who profit from it. If they can make money from a war, they will.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I had to let my cat in my room.
That's okay. Do you want to briefly cover the pork barrels, whatever it's called, pork projects? Because we don't really have that over here. So can you briefly explain what those are
The what
when
again?
it comes to the pork barrel projects? You know, where they create an army or they create technology for the military from all different states.
Yeah, I honestly never heard of that.
Really? So what the US does is they'll get like the whole different states will each produce parts of the jet
Oh,
because
okay. No, I know what you're talking about now.
yeah,
There's actually a reason for that. It's because different states have different materials that are more accessible than others. Like where I'm from in Philly, that's where Boeing tests all their aircraft before they send them to the military. But Philly is a steel, or Pennsylvania is a steel state. So a lot of aircraft that require steel, well, that comes from PA. If it's something, I mean, we don't have anything that requires coal anymore. But when we had things that required coal, that came from Pennsylvania and West Virginia.
Because I've heard said that the reason that happens is because it allows politicians to get more money spent in their county or in their state. That's the argument that I've heard for it.
It may be, but I've heard different from people who actually work for Boeing. Let me give you an example here. Whenever I'm on flights, I like meeting people and hearing their stories. I was on a flight from Seattle to Philly, and I sat next to this guy who worked on the Chinooks that the Army sent out. He would fly every couple of months. He would fly to Philadelphia to go to the Boeing training grounds there, and then he would watch the test pilots pilot it, and if it worked, they sent it out. And he was telling me, because I had actually asked about that. I was like, hey, why do you have aircraft parts made in different parts? And he told me, well, that's because certain materials are made from certain states, and we don't feel like shipping all those materials here. We can just have the parts made and then ship all the parts here. So it may be the politicians get that, but from what I've heard, it's a little different.
Yeah.
And this guy, even told me, is like, most of the people we have are ex-military pilots, but he's like, it's not because he told me this. He said it's not because they don't join us because they're getting paid more. We actually take them because they're already used to the aircraft that we're using, that we're testing.
Yeah, so that's what thing with MiG. The reason why they're giving MiG planes to Ukraine is it's the same operating system compared to the US, which is a different system. They're using the same system that the Ukrainian pilots are used to, because there's no point retraining them in the middle of a conflict. So when they just, okay, you guys know MiG, we'll get you guys to keep using that same system. We can retrain you to use the US system afterwards, but right now we're just going to use the same software.
Yeah, I mean, you also got to think of it like this: like military aircraft these days. It's not like the 40s anymore where you could cross-train on all the aircraft because they were easily cross-trained. These days, you have so many different types of equipment in a single aircraft that it takes years to memorize and get down. Like the average training for a military pilot takes 1 year. And most of that is just put on actually getting familiarized with the equipment in the aircraft.
Yeah, it's also a lot more specialized as well. Everyone has, the jets they have these days are a lot more specialized than, say, World War II prop planes, where you had, fighter bomber, dive bomber, torpedo bomber, and that's it. Now it's a lot more specialized.
Yep. For example, if you're a pilot and you do your 10 years and you just flew an A-10 and you want to do your 10 years, and do 10 more years, because in the US, the contract for pilots is 10 years. It's a required 10 years compared to every other job in the military, which is only usually like 4 or 5. But pilots, it's 10. You can't go to, let's say, an F-22. Let's say you want to go from an A-10 to F-22. You can't unless they're going to pay for another year or two of training, because that's how long it's going to require to get refamiliarized with that new aircraft. So that's why, like, these days you have pilots who just stay on a single aircraft for their entire career. Because retraining is a nightmare. So I can understand with trying to get them MiGs again, because if you want to get them, you want to try and train them on actual American equipment. Well, by the time you do that, the war is going to be over.
Yeah. I think the problem that I have with the MIC as an Australian is just how pervasive it is in the rest of the world. I don't think most Americans understand just how big it is everywhere else. So for example, Australia was going to buy nuclear powered subs from France. There were problems. The contract had a few problems with it. France. Apparently, France wouldn't keep up their end of the bargain. They wouldn't stay on schedule for production of the nuclear submarines. So last year they formed AUKUS, which is Australia, the UK, the US, and we're both there. We're both their bitches. So they decided, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to change, and instead of using the French submarines, we're going to buy American ones. So the French found out. By the way, the French found out about that through the news. Like, they weren't told in advance. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure they found out like everyone else did. And Macron was not very happy that we decided to change suddenly. I know at one point earlier this century, we were going to build our own software, and the US got upset and made us use their software for the Navy. It was either destroyers or submarines. And we wanted to use our own software, and the US said, no, you can't do that. You have to use our software, and basically forced us to use the US software. I think that was August 2001. Actually, I think it was right before 9/11. I could be wrong on that. I'm not a naval guy. My interest lies more in the army, not the Navy. But I'm pretty sure that was the case, that the US said, okay, you have to use our operating systems. You can't use anyone else's. The MIC has a lot of influence everywhere else.
Yeah, that's one thing I always find absolutely funny as hell is compared to all military branches, the MIC does not focus on the Navy because we still have destroyers that were built in the 80s that are still going. There are our mothball fleet, which is technically a reserve fleet. I don't care what anyone says. The mothball fleet's a reserve fleet because their ships can just be sent right back out. Most of them were built in the 70s and 80s. And for some reason, MIC does not really focus too much on the Navy. They're left out of everything. Like, even our most recent, when we were trying to make unmanned destroyers, I don't know if you ever seen the most recent ones. They only lasted a couple months before the Navy scrapped them.
Not surprised. So how do you think that will play out with the Space Force now? Because the US has won the Trump. We've just announced ours a few months ago, and we're going to have a proper Space Force. So how do you think the MIC will play out with the space industry?
Satellites. It's mostly just going to be satellites at first until we can actually colonize other planets. Because trust me, that's coming. Especially now that we know that there are other habitable planets out there. Like, you think it's convenient that we're going back to the moon? No, we're going to establish an actual moon base on there. You think all these billionaires are trying to fly off Earth just because they were bored? No, they're doing it because they know what's coming. That's one thing is I had like a weird drunken rant about this one time, but we're going to have a third world war. And then after that war, we're going to go and start colonizing other planets. Because we're going to do something really fucking stupid during it. It's like, not really an epiphany, but like, I'm trying to think of what the word here is for. A prediction. So I'm saying it's awfully convenient that right around the time that nations are creating their space aligned branches, that we're also preparing for a conventional conflict worldwide.
And of course, if that goes into space, that conflict, then they get all the satellites and stuff, and so they have to try and protect those satellites, and then have an arms race in space.
Oh yeah.
To try and protect your satellites, you have to try and start arming them, and then end up with an arms race. And then because you have an arms race, you got war. Because an arms race benefits the MIC, so they always push for it. But going back to before World War One, people often don't realize that there was a massive naval arms race between the UK and Germany.
Oh yeah, that's how the dreadnought was made.
The US was not second. Was like people often presume that the US was world number 2, and when the UK collapsed after World War II because they were in debt, that then the US took over. No, it was a fighting between the UK and Germany, an arms race over dreadnoughts and battleships and pre-dreadnoughts that led to naval developments that we had during the 1890s and early 1900s. That led to the battleship comes from that. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong, but it comes from around that time. Dreadnoughts, obviously, and just a massive arms race between Germany. Germany wanted to beat the UK, so obviously started investing heavily in the navy to defeat the Royal Navy, and that was a big factor behind World War One. People don't talk about it though, but it was a big thing. It was a naval arms race.
Yeah, that's why whenever I hear someone go, "Oh, well, World War One just so happened to happen because a Serbian shot an Austro-Hungarian," it's like, no, that was going to happen one way or another. There's going to be a conflict, and it was going to involve Germany and Great Britain. Just so happened to involve pretty much like most of the world.
But yeah, it was just the catalyst. There was a lot more stuff going on behind the scenes to cause that war.
Oh yeah, and then when the U.S. got involved, I remember I have this funny story about my great grandfather who served in World War One. You want to talk about conflicts the government was forced into, or I'm sorry, conflicts the government went into. He fought in the Moro Wars beforehand, which was because the U.S. and annexed the Philippines during the Spanish-American War. But there's a funny story about him. I'll just go over this briefly. He was a first sergeant as a recruiter in the U.S. Army. When war broke out between the U.S., like everyone was caught up immediately. It didn't matter who you were. If you were military, you were caught up. He showed up 5 days late, drunk, and not in uniform. And he was busted down from first sergeant to corporal, which in World War I ranks, it's not too many, but that's still pretty bad. And then the next day, he was commissioned as a second lieutenant. Because he had experience in fighting, and they were like, "Oh, you fought some absolutely crazy motherfuckers in the Philippines. So you know anything about the Moros? You know how crazy they were. Oh, you can probably fight the Hun too."
Crazy. You're drunk, but you have experience, so we'll take you.
Yeah. And then the other thing is his ship on the transport ship he was on had an outbreak of Spanish flu, and somehow he was the only one who didn't get it. I actually found the records of it thanks to a friend, and the captain had supposedly written in the log. Now I couldn't find the log entry myself. It was more like secondhand that it was said. He was like, Lieutenant Filkins must be the captain of the ship, I should say, must be some sort of demon because he's the only one who's not afflicted of this illness.
Spanish flu, and that's why we have COVID, or the COVID rule, because people always say the Spanish flu. They had masks back then, so we need masks now.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, Spanish flu. The reason Spanish flu got so bad was because of World War One, not because of trench conditions, mind you, because of mustard gas. It's a running theory, but it's one of those things that you just know is true. Mustard gas and Spanish flu got mixed together, and it mutated into the deadly variant that killed like a third of the population of the world. Because Russia's numbers have never been actually figured out. It's supposedly killed anywhere between, I think it's wildly crazy because it's anywhere between 70 million to 350 million. But
not just that as well. Like the world's medical supplies are being exhausted by 4 years of conflict, so the infrastructure wasn't there to deal with it. People had just spent 4 years fighting. There's no medicine supplies. There's no medical infrastructure. It's all geared for war, and then suddenly you have an outbreak of the disease. No one's prepared for it.
An outbreak that targets the healthy, the young and healthy too. Like that's why, like when you look at most death certificates for Spanish flu, they're usually in their 20s. Because people who it's weird because people that were not healthy, like they had some sort of underlying condition or whatever, the virus just went through them and then out. It didn't really affect them, or the elderly or the young. It mostly focused on young, fit men and women. Which
they also spent the last 4 years fighting as well, so they were all wounded and exhausted.
And you want to know something funny? Here's a fun fact for you. When I had COVID once, maybe twice, but I'm just going to say once because that second time was like it probably didn't happen. I just lost my sense of smell and taste, but that could have really been anything because sometimes my allergies do that. But when I had COVID, it just felt like a bad cold. I've had worse. And I don't mean that, I've had worse. I mean, when I had the flu, I blacked out for 2 days. Like, I don't remember any of those 2 days. I remember eating a sandwich, and that was it. And according to my dad, that was the only time he actually saw me eat because he thought I was eating at night. So if anything was going to kill me, it was going to be the flu.
And you survived that, so you survived COVID.
Yeah. Ironically, it was also when I got the flu was the week before my first World War I reenactment.
So was that cancelled then for you? Did you have to cancel that?
Oh no, I went. That's where this picture is taken.
Yeah. All right, we've passed the hour mark. I did have one last question for you before we finish up. How do you think it's going to play out with the rest of the Ukraine war to come? How do you think that's going to play out with the MIC? Do you think pushing for more war, or how do you think they'll react?
Probably pushing for more war and rearming during the ceasefire. I mean, most countries don't want anything to do. Like most countries that aren't directly affected by Russia don't want anything to do with it. Like NATO is like, nah, we're not getting involved. We don't want war. But the US is like, hey, we'll give you shit. So clearly it's more the US just wants to continue it. My guess is like if you look at everything going on, like how MasterCard and PayPal and all those other companies are stopped doing business with Russia, it's not like, oh, we're doing this because we think we're doing good. It's no, we're doing this because we want them to hate us. We're American companies and we want them to hate us. It's awfully convenient that a war happened. We were going to do this anyway, probably, but we're just doing it now. It's like everything that's happening that we're seeing right now is leading up to something. Best way to put it is think of Ukraine like Poland in 1939. The only difference is it's not getting steamrolled by two countries at once.
Yet.
Yeah. But that's where I'm saying is this is the start of something bigger. And when that next war ends, whenever the World War III happens, I'm really hoping that people blame the government for it.
But knowing humanity, they won't blame the government. They'll blame basically everyone else. They'll blame capitalism. They'll blame capitalism and fascism and Putin and Trump, because Trump's everything's Trump's fault.
Like
I saw an article that said that because Will Smith slapping Chris Rock was because of Trump creating a culture of violence, I'm pretty sure it was, in America when he was president.
No. Okay, so I want to briefly touch on that. Pfizer, this has actually come out recently. Pfizer was developing a medication for whatever disease Will Smith's wife has. And that whole thing was clearly something they did to get people talking about the disease.
Yeah.
Because were some documents dug up about some sort of patent for it. But either way, it's just so fucking stupid. I mean, Will Smith's from Philly. We do that shit all the time. But he's in an abusive relationship, and I almost feel bad for him. If he wasn't rich and an asshole, I'd feel bad for him.
Yeah.
But one of these days, I'm going to be rich from filmmaking, but I'm not going to be an asshole. So there's that.
Don't slap people. That's a life lesson for you. Don't slap people like Will Smith did.
Oh, if someone slaps me, I'm punching them. So, like, that's one thing I always tell people is like, I'm not a violent person, but if someone attacks me, I'm not going to just sit there and take it. I'm very defensive, I should say. Because you can punch someone and kill them with a single punch if you hit them in the right place. So, yeah. But I think it's kind of funny how Chris Rock is trying to make it sound like he has PTSD from the slap. Because he's like, oh, yeah, he's like, oh, I'm getting emotional because of it, and it's like, Jesus. Come on, man, you just got bitch slapped. I've been punched before. Come on now.
Crazy.
Wasn't even that much of a slap, but yeah, okay.
Yes. On that note, is there anything that you want to conclude with? Any concluding thoughts? Any final thoughts? Anything you want to plug before we finish up?
No.
Your YouTube channel?
Yeah, sure. I have to actually figure out what it's called. It should be Special Ed 1313. But
well, I will link it in the podcast bio, or not the bio, the description for the for this episode. Actually, I think it's linked in all the episodes anyway. I think I've got your details linked in every episode that we have.
Oh, nice. It'd be nice if like if like A and L could take off, so that way my channel could take off. But
You're right, us.
Yeah, but I'm actually changing the content up a little bit because what I'm doing is very niche and doesn't really get a lot of views. So I'm gonna work on changing it to where, because I want to do history related videos, something like that, like the history in this gaming video or something like that, you know, like
Yeah.
If you know about the Brothers in Arms series, like the history of this, how accurate is this kind of thing, while high, call it high history. If I ever get a TV show, since I don't drink alcohol anymore, I always wanted to be on Drunk History. Like that was like my big thing when I used to drink, is I want to get on Drunk History. But since I can't do that, I decided, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to start my own show called High History, where I bring someone on and we get high and talk about history together. Which is why I'm looking for jobs that don't do drug testing.
Well, don't talk about it publicly then. Don't talk about it publicly on YouTube.
Well, in the state I'm in now, it's completely legal, so I don't care.
Yeah.
But it's another thing you want to talk about government. So the state of New Jersey has legalized marijuana, because I'm in New Jersey now. I'm not in Philly. It's legalized marijuana, but they have not signed the order to allow medical marijuana companies to sell it. So let's say I can order edibles from out of state. When they become my possession, they're perfectly legal. But I'm not allowed to buy the shit in state yet.
crazy. Actually, I heard that was it the federal government's going to try and decriminalize drug use?
Yeah, but I mean,
But tax it.
but Biden said he was going to do that, and then I don't know if you heard about this. Biden and Harris were like, "Oh, we're going to legalize weed when we get in office." And I was like, "No, you're not. Both of you were like fucking Harris literally had people go on long-term prison sentences for marijuana. Had some sort of like poll in the White House for like, have you ever smoked weed or something like that? And like, we promised to let you keep your jobs, and anyone that said yes was fired. There's like over 100 people from the White House staff were fired.
Did they fire Kamala Harris? Because she's done way before. She submitted to it. Why wasn't she fired?
Because she's put people in jail for it. She doesn't care.
Free workforce.
Yeah, it's why I just don't like. I understand testing for like really hardcore drugs, but like weed, you shouldn't need to test for that anymore. It has the same effect on you as alcohol does. Like I know that because I've been drunk and high. So, and I've been like not exactly the same, but I've been mostly the same, except when I'm high, I can't get angry. Literally, it's impossible for me. I get a headache when I try to get angry while high.
Meanwhile, it's still illegal over here, basically in every state. The government likes that. I think it's illegal. Actually, no, they might have legalized small possession of small amounts in one state. There's talk of it, but it's illegal in every state and territory, and the federal government and everything. We do have my favorite political party in Australia is the Hemp Party, or what's called the Hemp Party. So hemp being weed, but also their name being the Hemp Party, help end marijuana prohibition, which I think is the best naming out there for a political party. They've started to have some success politically, but yeah, still a long way to go here. Even though 40% of Australians have used drugs at least once in their life, it's still illegal because the government likes to control our lives and determine what is and isn't moral based on arbitrary.
Like I know,
The government.
If I had a choice to be around potheads or alcoholics, I'd choose the potheads any day of the week. Like most of the best people I know smoke weed, so it's like I used to be an alcoholic myself. Alcohol was a hell of a lot worse on me than fucking weed. Like, come on now. Yeah, well, like I said, my ultimate goal is to get in the film industry. And when I start my own company, I promise to never fire anyone for weed. We'll just like hotbox it in the office.
Pull an Elon Musk.
Yeah, but the whole thing is fucking. You need money to make money, and I don't have the money to start my own company.
Not yet, anyway. Anyway, I think on that note, thanks for coming on. Thanks for talking about this that night in US time. I know it's getting late over there, so thanks for coming on.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll finish the stream up now.